You see my screen?
Yes, very good.
Oh, okay. So good day, everyone. So my name is Dr. Nicole George St. Louis. My co-presenter is not able to make it today, Miss Susan Driver. And we're from the Kenton Medway Medical School. That's in Canterbury in the UK. So good afternoon to everyone. All right, so I'm going to share today a digital escape room that I designed for the module that I work on. So I'll go to the next slide. Sorry, went too far. All right. So the module I work on is the Professional Development and Person-Centered Care module. So the first year of medical school, this module is where they do their medical ethics, scholarly skills, and this runs across the first year together with their basic sciences. So in order, if you can imagine that in addition to their basic sciences, that they have to learn a bit about academic writing, because this is also part of their professional development. And so it's always good to have an engaging way, an interactive way to engage them with this sort of content, which might be a little bit different from, the basic sciences. So in terms of the setting, the Essay Club is an iterative, supported, scaffolded approach to support them with the academic writing. Because at the end of that module, they have to write an essay, which is a summative essay on some of these principles. And so that is sort of like the context for this digital escape room. So in terms of learning purpose and design intent, it was not meant to replace teaching, but rather to consolidate concepts that they had already learned. It was in preparation for their summative essay, and more importantly, to provide an alternative way for learning that's underpinned by universal design for learning. So in terms of why Blackboard, so Blackboard is a virtual learning environment for those who might not be familiar with it. And this is the learning environment that we use for all our modules. So it was already familiar platform. It meant, they didn't have to download anything, go out of the virtual learning to open another program. So it was very familiar, it's reliable. We use it all the time and our students are used to it. And so it also have, functionality that enable like a structured progression or navigation through this learning environment. And so that's why we designed it using Blackboard. So in terms of designing it for learning, we use structural gamification, which meaning the content itself was not gamified. So it's still strictly academic content, but it's labeled or framed with narrative language. So the rooms, as I'll explain in a second, had names such as Logic Lab, the Argument Archive, Whimsical Reflection, and that gave it that sort of playful element. Thinking about the learners, we have variable learners who would have come from, from whether it's A levels with, it's just different background in terms of essay writing. It's a scaffolded way to support, to be inclusive, and this also lend to having that sort of psychological safety. It's adaptable. For this escape room, it was a in-classroom interaction, but this can also be adapted to online. So it's very adaptable. And the content itself, if this was to be used, let's say, in a different discipline, it's very easy to do the same concept in another discipline. All right, so this is just a schematic to give you an idea of what the journey would look like for the students. So they usually have 3 essay topics or essay scenarios that they have to choose from. So what I did was make one room, the Logic Lab, the first scenario, essay scenario, the second room, the second essay scenario, and the third room, the third essay scenario. And in terms of what the task was, so they're meant to address a task where they've given a section of what a student may have drafted, and the topic was crafting cogent arguments. And so they have a task related to this task. This is also related to their assessment. The second room, cracking codes of convincing claims. That's what the concept has been tested. And then they needed to reflect before they escape. So these are the arrows here. That's going towards support means that if they're not able to progress by getting the correct answer before they progress to the next room, they would actually engage with a support page. And that support page is going to help in terms of hyperlinks to more resources that actually help with the topic that's being assessed in that particular room. And they'll go ahead and progress. They had 3 attempts at this, and they got immediate feedback, which is another good feature of Blackboard. So they got immediate feedback and they can have a go at it. They worked in teams and self-selected teams. So the idea was just making sure that they had a really low stake environment so that they can actually collaborate, work through it together. The concepts were already taught before. So this was a matter of just consolidating learning before they make their final escape. And incentive, besides a digital trophy, the incentive was also some chocolates, but you can use whatever incentive you would like to use. This is just to give you an idea of what the interface looks like if you're just not familiar with Blackboard. So this is just a screenshot from my sandbox, because I actually had doodled with it in my sandbox before moving it to an actual module. So this is just the interface, what they would more or less sort of see when they first start. All right. So this one says you don't need to escape to learn. What this means is that even if you don't progress and you end up going through a branch pathway that takes you to this page that say, oops, you've hit a locked door, they are still learning because they are still going to be engaging with material and resources that's going to help. So the idea is to actually embed support within the escape room so that learning is not only just taking place if you manage to get through all the rooms, but you can learn at each of these points. Structure, debrief, and sense making. So it's fun to do a digital escape room. Yes, I know it's not a novel approach, but the most important part from my experience with this escape room was the part where you debrief. So when you debrief, the students actually get to clarify any misconception. Questions are, a bit more focused. And then the most important thing is that you sort of keep the academic intent. So though it's a playful way to learn, we just still want to make sure learning is taking place and that it's still linked to, the assessment and what you're helping them get prepared for, and leave opportunities for questions. So this is a really important part, I think, when thinking of an escape room for learning. So in terms of learner feedback, so it was the first time I've tried this approach, and at least more than 50% had said it was an interactive way of supporting learning. So these 2 feedback questions were framed very specific. The first one, to get an idea of whether or not it was an interactive, if they found it interactive and engaging way of learning, supporting their learning. And of course, we had 14% who said they didn't. And I'll cover that when I talk about what I've learned from this experience, because most people needed a bit more time. The second one, they had to at least say one thing they would take away from that session, from that experience, that's going to be helpful with their draft, because they were going to do a draft after this. And if you notice that the terms that came up the most were things like cogent argument, sound argument, reflect, not aspire. And those were linked to the concept that were being assessed within the various tasks in the different rooms. So it did show that they were actually taking away what they were meant to take away in terms of their learning. So some of the lessons learned is that they would actually need a bit more time. So they had 20 minutes for this session. It's the first time it's been run. And what you would realize is that you have variable learners. So you have learners that work at different pace, in terms of processing time, in terms of, being neurodiverse. And those are things that you'd have to think about. We don't know that, timetable or schedule time, you'll have to take those things into consideration. Another thing that was important is grounding the task to the assessment, because this iterative approach for some students, it may make them not be able to put the whole thing together, or where does that fit in terms of their whole academic writing process. So it's always good to sort of ground it back to what the task was in that escape room versus how does that relate to their task regarding their assessment. And so future iterations is also going to shape feedback, and I'm hoping I didn't run over time, but yes, so this work reframes digital escape room, as a very inclusive vehicle device, and we can reimagine the way we consolidate learning and provide alternative methods of presenting information that's underpinned by the principles of learning and design.
Hi, everybody. My name is Kathryn Drumm. Hopefully you can all see my slides. Hopefully see some thumbs up there. And I am an educational technologist at City St George's, University of London. Most of the year I help to train and support our teaching staff on how to use our virtual learning environment Moodle and our other educational technologies. But there is somebody else that I would like to introduce you to, and this is Evelyn, or Christmas Eve, if you will, and she works at Santa's North Pole workshop, and she's been the face of our advent calendars in Moodle since 2021. So today I'm going to talk about how the Advent calendar module came about, how it's changed over the years, how we go about creating it, and finally I'm going to ask whether or not it is an escape room or not. I want to say that at this stage that all of our modules, the participants on it are members of staff. We do enrol them in the student role on the modules, but they are all teaching staff or professional staff who are in the module. So how did it all start? Back in 2018 or 2019, when I was still an assistant educational technologist, I went on a one-day course about creating educational escape rooms run by Andrew Walsh of the Playful Learning Association. Some of you may know him. The emphasis in this session was very much on creating physical escape rooms, but already at that point I was thinking, could I transform this into an online escape room on Moodle? So I'm just going to have a quick drink of water. Try not to cough and splutter too much. So I had a little go by myself, just creating an escape module on Moodle. It was very simple. Every day you would go in, try a different task. You would have to do an activity, open a file, post to a forum, something like that. And when you had completed that activity, you would be allowed into next day's activity. I just circulated it around our department and it didn't really go very far. Strangely enough, in 2020, we didn't get around to doing an advent calendar. I can't remember why. I think there was something else going on then. But in 2021, we came back to the idea. And at this point, I came up with the great idea, which was if I get the rest of the team involved, we can probably do this a lot better. So what we did was my colleague Steve came up with the beautiful picture of Evelyn that you've just seen, and we came up with the idea that Eve had just been promoted to Head of Learning at Santa's Workshop, and we used this as the hook to hang everything on in the module. So Steve and my other colleague Emma, who may be lurking in the audience today, came up with this beautiful setup that we had little illustrations. Each day a window would open, and again there would be an activity to try, and you would just go through and try the activities as the calendar went on. We did something very similar in 2022, although at that point we brought in the idea that you would collect a letter each day, and that would you would then solve an anagram and get into the final activity on the last day. In 2024, though, we decided to try something a little bit different. And this is when it started to become more like an escape room. We had an overall narrative and a continuing puzzle throughout the whole 12 days. So I was inspired by Myrtle, which I think got mentioned in the keynote yesterday, where you have a set of suspects, weapons, motives, locations, and then you get given a bunch of clues. You put these into a grid and solve a murder. We decided that murder wasn't terribly Christmassy, so instead our puzzle was who had stolen the keys to Santa's sleigh. So each day you would go through, you would do an activity, but as you were doing the activity, you were getting your clue, you put all the clues together, and at the end of it you came up with who the suspect was, what their motive was, where they had hidden the keys, and where the crime had taken place. So we then carried this on to our last Advent calendar, last December, where our theme was North meets South. Now, I said I work for City St George's, University of London. It's a bit of a mouthful. This is because the institution came together in 2024 when City, which is based in Clerkenwell and Moorgate, which is in North London, merged with St George's University, which is based in Tooting, which is in South London. So for those of you that don't know London very well, we were bringing North and South together. Now the two campuses are actually linked by the Northern Line on the tube. So we came up with the idea that the North and South poles were merging, and that Evelyn had to work with Penny the penguin from the South Pole. They were going up and down on the Polar Express, and our puzzle that year was that the automatic AI autopilot had gone rogue. They were given a series of clues as they went through every station, and then they had to break into the engine room and reset the engine. So because the whole idea of the calendar was that we were bringing North and South together, we had two overriding principles in the calendar that year. So we had to make sure that it was accessible to everybody. We're still in the phase of merging our different IT systems. So we had to make sure that any tools, features, systems that we featured on the Advent calendar were accessible to people on both campuses. And if they weren't accessible on one campus, then we would provide an alternative to it. So we wanted to make sure that everybody could take part. The other aspect of accessibility is that we wanted to model good digital accessibility. So every activity on the module was digitally accessible, and also a lot of the activities revolved around the idea of digital accessibility. So for example, Emma, who I mentioned earlier, created an H5P resource where there should have been images, but instead there was alt text for them, and you had to look at the alt text to work out a clue. We also had a video which had captions. The sound went odd during the video, and you had to look at the captions to, again, be able to get your clue for that. So how do we decide what we're going to include in the Advent calendar each year? Very often we try to put in some of the most commonly used activities that you can use on Moodle, but we try to frame them in a different way. So for example, Moodle lets you create quizzes, and so what we've done is, in the very earliest iteration of the Advent calendar, we had a very simple multiple choice quiz. But then we went on to having a quiz that demonstrated every single question type that you could create in Moodle. The next year we did one that was around the idea of creating formative quizzes. So we built in hints, and you could take the quiz multiple times to demonstrate that. And last year we demonstrated how you could use confidence-based marking in it. We also look at what are some of the tools that are available that are kind of less well known or aren't used as much. So, for example, in our training last year, we found that a lot of people had not heard about Moodle books. So my colleague Mariam created a really charming book that had information about all the creatures you could find at the North and South Poles, and had we also like to promote new and fun stuff. So one of my colleagues, Matt, is very interested in AI, and he was able to create an AI agent that spoke in the voice of Christmas past, and our participants could interrogate this agent to get a clue. And finally, we like to promote what our team does best. So again, Emma, your ears will be burning, but Emma is part of our multimedia team. She created this really great video here. I'm afraid I don't have time to show you the whole video, but we had station announcements as you went through the Polar Express, and we're given information about the fact that Holly leaves on the line had delayed the train and things like that. So we like to promote what we do. So as I was saying, it takes a whole village to make the module. So a little shout out to my colleagues. Matt wants to remain anonymous, so that's why he's a strange silhouette there. So I want to finish off by saying, was it an escape room or not? I was looking for a definition of an escape room, and then luckily we got one in the keynote yesterday. So we have the idea of this interactive game, which are group solving puzzles with a clear objective. So I would say that we're kind of escape room adjacent, perhaps. So what all of our staff are working on this alone. So they're coming in as one person and solving the puzzles by themselves. But a lot of this is because we are trying to make sure that it is, again, as accessible as possible. You can come in and you can do this Advent puzzle anytime that you want. So you're not constrained by a time limit. The only time limits we have is that obviously we start on December 1st. It runs for 12 working days. Each day a door opens and there's a different task to do. There's a puzzle to complete by the end, but you don't have to complete that puzzle if you don't want to. And in fact, you can start the Advent calendar any day you want and then join up. We also make sure that you don't have to solve a puzzle every day to get access to the next day. We found in previous iterations where we made people solve a problem to get into the next day that very often they didn't solve it and they just gave up on it. When we brought in the idea of letting everybody go in if they wanted, to go through and not take part in the puzzles if they didn't want to, we got much more completion of the whole module. And the other thing that we did was that at 2 points throughout the Advent calendar, there was a chance to join a special group that got extra hints and tips. So we were definitely working on the idea that there would be no elf left behind. Everybody would have a chance to complete the module. And then finally, when we had gone through and people had had a chance to post their answer to the overarching puzzle, we explained at the end what the solution was and how you would have got to that solution. So as I was saying, I think we're kind of escape room adjacent, but we're making it as accessible and easy to access as possible for everybody. I'm very happy to announce that Evelyn has been promoted to Professor of Polar Pedagogy, and she and I have both been listening with great interest to all of the sessions this year, and who knows what she will get up to next December. So thanks very much.
Yeah, my name's Ellis. I'm working at the London School of Economics and Political Science in the Learning Enhancement Unit, and I'm a big fan of escape rooms and puzzles and simulations and LARPs inside and outside education. So this has been a fantastic couple of days. As with Kathryn's, this one is kind of teaching the teachers, it's staff facing, and it's escape room adjacent. So yeah, I teach on a PG certificate. It's for incoming staff at LSE. And I have an option module, which is about how students learn and how you can get evidence of their learning. So what I wanted staff to be able to do is to know where to find evidence on what was and wasn't working in their teaching, and then kind of triangulate those sources a little, mash them up with some relevant pedagogic research literature, some theories and concepts about how people learn, and then produce a hypothesis about what was going wrong for them and what they might do to fix it. So this was exactly what they would have to do in relation to their own courses for the assessment for this PG Cert module. So yeah, I created a Marie Celeste course. I wanted to throw in a little bit of speculative storytelling. It got a lot less speculative as it went on. Initially, there was like time travel and everything, but I find that a little bit of fantasy frees up the mind and encourages kind of playful participation. So this course went so wrong that the course convener can't be reached anymore. Nobody knows where he is. So we can't ask him what went wrong. And that generated quite a lot of sympathy later amongst the participants. But the participants were given a pack of everything that was related to the course that was still available. It had a shirty post-it note on the front from the head of department saying, can you work out what symptoms can you see here? What's causing these problems and how can we solve them next year? The work I had to do was to create a packet of artifacts with threads of evidence going through them. I've got some, I'll show you some photos in a moment, but so I wrote an external examiner report which suggested that the student work was kind of weak on making connections. I created registers which showed that attendance was dropping off over the term. I made a course guide and some exam questions which all treated the concepts as very sort of separate and siloed. Then some student feedback, quantitative and qualitative, which echoed all of that, and a couple of teaching observations and so forth. And I tried to make all these artifacts resemble the format that the participants would experience them in, so they look very LSE official. I printed them all up. Initially, I wondered about creating a digital resource for people to kind of click around, even with audio and video, but I wanted that sense of communal meaning making and getting people onto their laptops felt like it would become less collaborative. So even if people were reading an artifact individually, they'd still be all sort of standing in the same space. I also included a couple of photocopied extracts from some research literature, as though it had been passed on by people who had done the teaching observations. So there were more post-it notes saying, maybe this might help, or have a look at this. And then I had to map those artifacts against what the big problems were and the pedagogic themes that I wanted them to hit, which were, and the participants spotted these later, like, yeah, the course was set up wrong. It was rewarding specialization and surface learning. The tutor hated telling students that they'd got things wrong, so they were permanently confused as to what was right. The learning in the seminars was pretty much a lecture, and it didn't get to active learning until later in the term. So I was hoping they were going to pick up on all of this. So how did they take it? I will say I did a dry run with colleagues in my learning and teaching unit, and they took ages. I gave it to the academics, and they just sort of tore through it. So I'm not entirely sure what the distinction was there, but have some pictures and a little timeline of the last time I ran it. I've run this 3 times now. So here's what the pack looked like. I gave them a table to work out. They mostly kind of stood or sat round. At the start, there was a little moment of uncertainty. People literally said, am I doing this right? They laid out all the documents, they started naming them, but then they did go immediately into detective mode. So I'm seeing a lot of clues here. This is the smoking gun. He wants to cram more information into the class, but the students want more interaction, and he's saying no. I was gratified they started referring back to previous discussions from the same seminar about the balance between meaning making and information. So I felt like the activity wasn't walled off from the rest of the seminar. About 3 minutes in, they did start triangulating that evidence. So they noticed that the peer observation and the external examiner were both saying there's far too much positive commentary in the feedback and it's lacking clarity. 10 minutes in, they started pulling out some broad categories of problem. 15 minutes, lots of sympathy for the tutor. Poor Alan. They said things like, oh, look, I included a little kind of write-up of how some of the seminars had gone from Alan, saying things like, students not talking, why not? Great topic. But yeah, they said, he is responding to the student feedback, got to give him props. One quieter participant who wasn't joining in as much in the discussion started making a big map of the issues on a giant post-it note, which I will show you. But I was very pleased that even if they didn't feel able to like chip in loudly, they were still getting something from it. There was some kind of spontaneous discussion of teaching evaluation processes and tools, which I thought was super useful. So they were looking at Alan's learning log, which I'd faked, as mentioned. And somebody said, does anyone else do this? Does anyone make notes on what worked and what didn't? It's a good idea, which is good because we would like them to do that. And others replied about how they approached it, which was super useful. And some of them even said, this is a very cool setup. I'm thinking about whether I can use it on my course. 25 minutes, I started to prod them for some concrete solutions, and they started to explicitly connect to these pedagogic theories that we touched on earlier in the seminar. So things like constructive alignment, depth and surface learning. One of them said, the course designers really need to think about Brooks' pyramid. He meant Bloom's taxonomy, but it was really nice that he spotted that. And I think the fact that it was all artificial meant that the tutor got massive sympathy, but they felt really free to completely insult the fake course design. They looked at the assessment and they said, all the questions are just asking students to explain something that already exists. It's just a memory test. Each question just deals with an individual concept. One of them said, what is a commodity? You should know that. You should do more interesting things with it. So there was sympathy for Alan, but there was hostility towards the course designer. And that was really amusing to me because both of those things were fictional and both of them were actually me. But it led to a really decent conclusion, which somebody said, this is probably very indicative of many courses. He's trying hard to impart knowledge, but the structure around him is not supporting him. So here are some of the things that they pulled out as problems and solutions. To conclude, I think it did what I wanted it to do, and also some things that I wasn't expecting. So it did connect up to previous discussions from earlier in the day. It helped them to discuss what tools were available to them as teachers and consider whether they wanted to use them. Things like keeping a little mini quick diary of how a seminar had gone and what worked and what hadn't. And it helped them to reflect on other courses that they'd seen and how they were created. Things I'd do differently, I think I created sort of individual student profiles. Some of them were more work oriented, some of them were more keen on the topics, some of them had other commitments. I put in some sort of specific educational needs, but they didn't really come up. I would either put less time into that or make it intrinsic to the solutions. And I do want to evaluate it more. I think there's a lot of enthusiasm in the moment, but did it help them approach the assessment? I'm following up at the moment and hoping to hear back from them. But yeah, I think on the whole, it was really worth doing. It was a very engaged moment in a long, almost day-long workshop of staff development. And it was really fun, and lots of sympathy to Alan, who was put in a very difficult situation, even though he was entirely imaginary.